When it comes to video game consoles, the thing that shapes the library the most isn't how many pixels it can push on the screen, it isn't how many bits wide the bus is, it's what's the default controller like. The way it's designed shapes what you can do. In the case of the Cassette Vision, the controller is everything that Epoch had on their standalone console systems. And in some ways, that's an absurd amount of options, and in other ways, it is severely deficient. When the control scheme was designed, Space Invaders and Galaxian were the most popular video games on the market. So one-axis controllers should be enough for everyone, right? Well, we've reached 1982, and it's Pac-Man's world now. And the Cassette Vision doesn't have any inherent method of two-axis control. We've already bumped into the problems with that in Big Sports 12, where you had to use two dials to maneuver paddles around in some of the minigames. But for PakPak Monster, they needed four-way digital controls. Now you might think that PakPak Monster is a takeoff on Pac-Man, Namco's arcade smash, but in an odd way it isn't. It's really a consoleized version of Epoch's LCD handheld PakPak-Man. Since they changed the name for the Cassette Vision, my assumption is that after Galaxian they found out exactly how litigious Namco was. One of the keys to Pac-Man is that snappy four-way movement, and the solution for that on the Cassette Vision was not the best idea. It uses all four buttons on the front of the Cassette Vision as directional controls. These buttons are all in a line. So push 1 moves you left, push 2 moves you right, push 3 moves you up, and push 4 moves you down. Hope you can remember which direction is which at critical moments. And I can say it is not something that you get used to. PakPak Monster was released about a year after the Cassette Vision launched. We're a year into the system's life and only getting the 6th game because Epoch made one of the classic blunders of early console manufacturers. No, they didn't start a land war in Asia. They decided that they didn't need software. The development team across the entire lifetime of the Cassette Vision was only 3 people, and they only had one development system to work with. So Epoch never got the rolling snowball where software drove more sales. They were treating the Cassette Vision like it was one of their standalone consoles. Except this time, it could be used for 2 or 3 games and then disposed of. While the best example that they could follow, Atari, did keep all of that development in-house, they also had a pretty big software development team, and they were regularly putting out games of all varieties. Just like in Pac-Man, your goal in PakPak Monster is to eat all of the dots on the screen. All 8 of them. Because that's a pretty small number, they make you eat all of the dots 3 times. And the color changes every time you pass over them. So it goes from green to red to purple. And the differences between that red and purple are so slight that I can barely make them out on my old television set, so it's going to be next to impossible for you to see the difference after it's gone through a few rounds of digital compression. To prevent you from just going back and forth on top of a dot, you're not allowed to pick up the same dot twice in a row. You'll have to go off, touch something else, and then come back. Because it's possible for your last dot to have more than one chomp left in it, you always completely consume the last pellet in the maze when you run over it. Technically, this can be used to accelerate how quickly you get through the game, but it's really not that much of an advantage. There are 2 monsters that are chasing you through the maze, though chase might be stating things a bit strongly. It feels a lot more like they have a random walk pattern, flipping a coin whenever they reach a branch to decide which way to go. As you clear mazes, they'll start getting faster, though they're still not difficult to avoid. It's been about 6 months since I previously played PakPak Monster, and in this recording session, my first game, as I'm still fumbling with the controls, took about 20 minutes to complete. There are 2 difficulty settings. Level 1 gives you 6 lives, and the monsters start out slower, while Level 2 gives you 3 lives, and the monsters start out a bit faster. Naturally, since this is Pac-Man, there are energizers, or power essa as the manual calls them. Essa can mean pellets. Collect one of these and the monsters turn blue, and PakPak Monster can devour them himself. If you eat a monster, they turn into a pair of eyes that runs around the maze, returns to the center, and will eventually re-emerge. The Power Essa always appear in the upper right or upper left-hand corners of the maze. Which one it appears in is randomly determined at the start of the stage. There isn't a pattern to how they appear, and if you restart the game, it might appear in a different corner. You have to eat it 3 times as well, which means you're going to have 3 chances to eat the monsters. There's one more thing that appears in the maze, and that's the question mark. Eating that gets you bonus points between 100 and 800. That's PakPak Monster. Eat the dots, eat the ghosts, repeat until you're ready to turn the system off. There's an obvious comparison to be made between PakPak Monster and the Atari VCS version of Pac-Man. That version of Pac-Man is a bit infamous for its quality, but really it's not that bad. It's a big step down from the arcade, and the choices for what they chose to compromise on are a bit questionable. But Atari VCS Pac-Man is a recognizable version of Pac-Man. In 1983, it was a decent way to play Pac-Man in your home. It more or less carried over the core aspects of the Pac-Man experience. PakPak Monster does not. The control scheme is just nightmarish to use. Requiring that you hit the same dot multiple times makes a mess of the Pac-Man mechanics where you're clearing out areas. You basically have to work 3 times as hard to have a safe zone in the game. Your enemies aren't aggressive and don't have any real personality, and they're not numerous enough to really corner you. With only 2 monsters, they have to randomly walk to the same section of the maze at the same time, while you happen to be in between them, and that's really unlikely. PakPak Monster is a good example of just how restricted the Cassette Vision was. Because they offloaded so many expensive components onto the cartridge, they were stuck with options that were primitive even in the late 70s. And while some Cassette Vision games were able to find ways to make interesting games within that limitation, PakPak Monster is not one of them.